All right, in my first ever prophecy that I actually ever published on Calling of a Ravenous Bird, episode 1. This one's so easy just to recall, so amazing. And this was the first one I ever published, and this had to do with the Australia and Darwin City. Now, there was something else that was coupled there into that, where I spoke about the actual economy and China having to do a hostile takeover. And people didn't realize that this week, Australia was surrounded by China. Now, they're in the city of in the state of Queensland, which is in the city of Brisbane, and the city of Brisbane is situated over there, is that they are dealing with their own cyclone. So that is something that's also got to do with the situation out in Australia. But they also have a big problem from China, where the Navy, and they're pretty much the number one ranked Navy in the world, were just doing their, as China always do, they like to circulate things before running any sort of military drills or anything. So they were just giving a little bit of a warning to Australia, because Australia, also the government decided to send troops over to assist Ukraine. And China, who are actually in alliance with Russia, are in on that. But there is something else to that, and that ties in with the prophecy where I spoke about the hostile takeovers. And now this hostile takeover wasn't necessarily that they were going to use arms, they were going to threaten. For one, I saw that threat was there, but what they wanted was just the means of production that they have bought, or quote unquote, and I'm putting it in a big citation marks, that they bought from Australia. Meaning that what they were doing is that all the imports that they were getting from Australia, they were heading up to China, was actually done with a sort of above the market pricing, which meant that they were paying about 3 times the amount if they solely only just sent it to China, meaning that they don't send it anywhere else. That Australian exporters should only be exporting their goods over to China, and that's all they wanted from them, and they would get 3 times the amount. Now, of course, isn't it a bit too good to be true that China was so generous and wanting to pay 3 times the amount that they get all of this? Of course, there was something in on that. The reason being is that they wanted the means of production, and we've seen that during COVID, when they stopped accepting all the imports that were coming in from Australia at their ports, and they left it dead there and saying that no, COVID concerns, we don't want your goods returned back to sender. And what they were saying, that they were about to actually do their release clause, meaning that they've already fait accompli, that's what they call it, as in just to pretty much initiate the hostile takeover, that the producers out in Australia were so reliant on China that they only had China as one single contract and didn't actually sell elsewhere. And that was the end goal, is the fact that when China wants its payback on its goods for their generous amount and their generous amount of spending, meaning that everything that is actually was known as an Australian producer, an Australian company or whatever it was, now becomes a Chinese company via the means of perhaps going into the court system. Now, this was a deal brokered by the Australian government. So the government would then, of course, have to go into the whole judiciary system of theirs and ensuring that, when the transfer of assets happen, just send it over to China, let the people from the CCP, as in the Chinese Communist Party, take over the means of production. And that's how things are going to work and operate at this point forward. So that was always the end goal at the end of the day, and that's always what they wanted to accomplish by doing all of this. And needless to say that, the economic situation out in the whole in the whole Australia, and of course China, has prompted this and has made it a little bit urgent, because such is the global recession that we're seeing, especially post the pandemic since then. Secondly, and I think what Australia is going to do as a retaliative measure is going to run to Donald Trump, like Scott Morrison, the former Prime Minister of Australia, did, and because they've got a China problem. So I think that's going to happen, because that also ties in with another prophecy I was given about the Australian sort of government, and everything is going to now be taken over by the USA. So I do believe that there's going to be a little bit of a little tussle, because eventually what's going to happen is that all the stuff in Australia is going to start becoming more resembling, more so I should say, and also starting to take the names of the American former presidents and that sort of thing. So the American culture is going to become even more infused into Australia, so to speak. So I don't know if it's going to lead to a war. I didn't see any of that. I don't know if it's going to be a USA versus China war out in Australia. It's going to be that sort of thing. But essentially, even if it leads to that, it's going to be an American victory, so to speak, because of the fact that what I started seeing was the developments that were happening in and around Australia, and even the smaller towns and everything were starting to be American franchise, and it grew even more so even in the larger cities. So that is something that I had in a vision at the time, which should pretty much be realized at this point. And I think this is a important point of contestation when it comes to the realization of what God had actually poured out to me and had actually shown me at the time.